Okay, having a look in this video of how to find the absolute maximum or minimum of a function. So there's two things that we will have to do in that. So first, identifying the maximum minimum points, like the stationary points, identifying if they're maximum minimum, but then we also have to take into account the domain. So in this case, we've got between -2 and 6. So we'll then, as a last step, check that in the function against what we work out with our stationary points. So first step, obviously, we're going to do the derivative. So we get 8x to the power of 3 minus 16x. Then we're going to want to find when that is equal to 0. So we will factorize that as 8x outside of x squared minus 2. So then we know that 8x must be equal to 0, so x is equal to 0, or x squared minus 2 is equal to 0, so x squared must be equal to 2. So x is going to be the square root of 2, remembering that that can be positive or negative. So then we would check at this point as well whether they were in the domain that we were looking at. Otherwise we would discard any that weren't in the domain that we were investigating. So they're all in the domain, so that's fine. So now we'll go on to determine their nature. So looking at then the second derivative, we're going to get 24x squared take 16. Now, the good thing about that, because we've got our positive or negative square root of 2, when we square that, we're going to get the same number, so we don't have to do it more than once. So putting in 0, we would have 24 times 0 squared is 0, take 16. So f double dash of 0 is going to be negative 16. Being negative 16, that means that is a maximum. Then we're going to put in our square root of 2, and like I said, I don't have to do both the positive and the negative because they're going to get the same answer. So I'll put that in. Obviously, when I do the square, when I square the square root of 2, I'm going to get 2. 24 times 2 is 48. Take away 16, and that's going to give me 32 for both of those. So that means they are going to be a minimum for that. So now we have our points where they're maximum minimum. Obviously we need to sub that back in to our original equation to find out what those y values are. So we want to go back into the original and put in 0. So we've got 2x, so 0 to the power of 4 is 0 minus, so we're going to get 0 for our maximum point there. And then for our square root of 2, again, we're going into one where there's 4 and 2, so the negative and the positive will work out the same. So when we pop that in, we're going to get negative 8. So we've got a maximum of 0 and a minimum of negative 8. But like I said, we can't stop there because we do have to check our domain. And when we sub that in, what are we going to get? So when we sub our negative 2 in to our original equation, that's going to give us 2 to the power of 4 is 16. Well, negative 2 to the power of 4 is still going to give us 16. Timesing by 2 gives us 32. And then when we square negative 2, we get 4. Times 8 is 32. 32 take 32 is 0. So we've got negative 2, 0 there. And then when we sub our 6 in, and obviously if this is a tech active question, you can always just put that function in there and get those values off your calculator. But when we pop that in, we get 2304 as our answer there. So then when we look at those, so that's our 6, 2304. So then we look at those y values. Obviously our minimum one is going to be negative 8. There's nothing lower than that in our domain that we're looking at. However, our maximum that we got here of a 0, there we get the 2304 when we sub in the 6. So that's got to be our maximum value, and our minimum value is the negative 8. So don't ever forget to check your domain in there, those values in your domain, to make sure that they may, whether they're higher or lower than the maximum minimum values you get from your turning points.